which is the first comprehensive municipal response to human trafficking by a U.S. city. And last but certainly not least, we have Bruce Mann here. He's the Director of Freight Mobility.
Community university event. If you don't know, the partnership is an almost 20-year, the center is almost a 20-year-old nonprofit affiliated with the Greater Houston Partnership. And our mission is to think and act strategically about the future of the Houston region. And we do so by bringing people together like you from various walks of life, from business, from government, and from the community to work together on the most important problems facing the long-term future of the Houston region. So we do that in three ways. We do that through strategic planning, through our leadership program, and through future community awareness. And so today's community university is an example of that outgrowth, that third category, future community awareness, but it's also very much tied in to our leadership program, which we'll be hearing a little bit more about later today. In this leadership program, we basically bring people together twice a year, take existing people who are in the community who are working on important issues and to immerse them in some of the issues facing our community. We arm them with data, we introduce them to leaders in the community, and then we send them out on what we call learning journeys to grapple with issues that they probably don't know that much about, but give them an opportunity to learn more about these issues. And as a result of that, they come back and some of them get very engaged and inspired to work on these issues. And so the community university is really an outgrowth of what we do in our leadership program. It's an way to capture some of the lessons learned and some of the insights that were gathered with some of these learning journeys and really share them with the greater community. We're going to present 4 of these over the course of the year. And so this program originated with Bruce Mann, who you'll meet in a few minutes. And the work that he did in the Leadership Forum is in the spring of 2016 on human trafficking. And as you'll hear today, he's become a very passionate advocate for this issue. And it's really it was very inspiring to hear his learning journey and what he's done and how it's really affected his life. And so that is really what we try to achieve in our learning, in our leadership programs, and in these community universities. Before we start, there have been a number of people involved in this program, and I'd like to recognize them. First, I'd like to start with our steering committee. If you were on the steering committee, could you please stand? And let's have a round of applause. And we also have a very, very active board that gives me a lot of direction, some of which I follow.
Thank you, Brett. I'm Megan Ebedat. As he just mentioned, I'm a vice president over at Wells Fargo within the investment banking group, specifically for acquisitions and divestitures. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to the inaugural event. We are proud to be the presenting sponsor for this unique series that's going to address a variety of social and community issues facing the region. With more than 3,600 team members in the area, it's very important to us to identify ways to help people thrive within the city. So we understand the important role that businesses play in the success of our communities, and that's why at Wells Fargo we strive to be the catalyst for the stability, growth, and prosperity of all the communities that we are in. We applaud the center's work to bring to light some of the challenges that our region is facing, and together we can further the conversation between the business and civic communities to strengthen our social and economic footprints. So without further ado, we hope you enjoy tonight's event, and thank you so much for coming.
Hello, and welcome all of you this afternoon for this panel. And you guys are just going to love our panelists. Great crew. But to start us off, we decided to show a video, actually, to kind of help us define our terms when we're talking about human trafficking.
Of a person through force, fraud, or coercion. Human smuggling and human trafficking are different crimes. Human smuggling is the illegal movement of someone across a border. Human trafficking is the illegal exploitation of a person. Human trafficking is about exploitation, not transportation. Human trafficking is a highly profitable crime and a violation.
Our panelists, we have David Reed here. He's the Chief Marketing Officer of National Oil Well Barco and board member of Redeemed Ministries, a group that does residential rehabilitation for people who have been trafficked. David is working on creating a volunteer model where business professionals, programs, and Chief Operating Officer. And we also have Meenal Patel Davis. She is the special advisor to Houston Mayor Sylvester Turner on human trafficking, which is the first municipal level position of its kind, actually, in the US. She developed Bruce's learning journey 2 years ago, prompted him to bring in some of the folks on this panel to help train his volunteers to recognize victims of human trafficking. So let's have a quick round of applause for our panel. All right, so let's jump.
Question and issue, and so prevalence is very difficult to determine. To do it, you need to actually do a prevalence study that requires an independent researcher, and the reason you need an independent researcher is because there's risk to human life and to a victim of trafficking that presents. So usually university boards don't give approval for those kinds of studies. So what that really all means is that it ends up being extremely cost prohibitive to do something like that. And there's really just one person that I've come across that does scope studies like that, and that's a gentleman named Siddharth Kara, who is a professor at Harvard Kennedy School and has done work like this and is responsible for a lot of the worldwide projections you see through the International Labor Organization and things like that. So to bring it down to Houston, we do have some numbers that we use, and oftentimes what you'll see used, not all of the time, are numbers from the National Trafficking Tip Hotline, and those are really just an indicator of awareness. And we've had groups like Tamika's group and other practitioners in Houston so long, doing work for so long, there is a high level of awareness. So I'll give you some of the National Trafficking Tip Hotline numbers for 2017. They had about 641 calls to the tip hotline just from Houston, about 296 cases confirmed of trafficking, and it was a 70%, 30% split, sex and labor trafficking. So that's some of the numbers you hear often. One of the things I like to do to draw an example too is in the city of Houston, there is a problem specifically with the illicit massage parlors in town. And if we were to take the number 200, multiply, let's say they each had 6 women inside of them every day, 200 times 6, or let's say 200 times 3, because not everybody is going to be a victim of trafficking. Just in a day alone, you would have that number just in that one industry. And there is a report that's come down from the National Human Trafficking think tank called Polaris, which also runs that tip hotline that actually describes 25 different industries in which trafficking takes place, and I'm just giving you the numbers and examples for one. So that's usually what we say when we get asked questions about numbers. And that's
and I think that as time goes on and more investigation, more research is done, and you get to the number 25, and I think those that you mentioned are the primary ones that we particularly focus on, educating individuals in the community about.
And so who are we talking about exactly? Who are the victims of human trafficking we see here in Houston?
I think, you know, and maybe I'm going to answer this question a little bit differently is, thank you. I'm going to answer this question a little bit differently, and I'm going to talk about it's not hard to be one. You know, sometimes, you know, just imagine a 16-year-old kid who's abused by his parents, and you know, one day just decides to run away, and you get to a highway that separates one side of town from the other, and you can go left down the highway, right down the highway, or across the street. If you go across the street, you go to a friend's house, great. If you went left or right, you might be a victim of human trafficking. And in that moment, when you're 16 years old, you're not thinking, that's the option. If I go left or right, like that's not the outcome you're thinking about, but it's this one small moment in time where you're going to make a choice that can really change the outcome of your life. And you know, you never know what that's going to end up looking like. And that 16-year-old kid was actually me. And you know, by the grace of God, I went across. and not left or right. And it's that simple to end up as a victim of human trafficking. It's adding, it's answering an ad that says $17.25 an hour, no experience required. And, it's kind of one of those things, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And we need to, part of it's just educating people about it's not hard to happen. It's not meant to scare you, because we're not trying to do that. It's just, you can end up a victim of human trafficking by just really making a bad choice sometimes that you don't understand at the time is a bad choice.
Yeah.
I think it's two things. I think you're right. It's exploitable vulnerability and then access. And so when someone is vulnerable, if the traffickers can find any way to access to a vulnerable person, and the assumption that we always have is that someone just grabs someone and takes them and runs with them, which I'm not saying that doesn't happen. But what actually happens usually is a relationship gets built to build trust, and that's how they draw them away. And so that's probably the most common thing that we're seeing.
And
you're going to have a potential victim of human trafficking. That's pretty much what drives this whole thing, is greed, and then having a vulnerable population who's lacking something. And oftentimes that's from an economic standpoint.
Yeah, and I grew up in a middle-class house, and you would think it's the perfect, 3 kids, 2 parents, both still in the same house, 2 cars, 2 dogs, but you're a vulnerable person because of this abuse issue, or a vulnerable abuse person because of what's happening inside of that situation. Or, you're trying to, add income to your family, and this sounds like a great opportunity, and hey, they're struggling, and here's a job that pays all this money, and it just doesn't turn out as good as it sounds. And, there's countless examples of that. I think there's an example from hurricane recovery where people got brought from another country into the U.S. for labor trafficking. So it doesn't take much, and it disproportionately probably affects lower poverty, but it doesn't mean that's the only people that it impacts. It can be anyone that's really in that category of vulnerable.
Were you a victim?
No, but I could have been if I had made the wrong choice. My life could have been completely different. And that's really, for me, why I'm so passionate about this issue, is because it could be any of us. I literally ran away from home, and I'm sitting at the highway, and I remember this moment, and it was like, what am I gonna do? Where am I gonna go? Do I wanna get out of Iowa? Or, do I just go across town to stay in a friend's house? And for me, by the grace of God, I went across to the other side of town and came back a couple days later, and I was fortunate. I was fortunate. Maybe I was listening to Jesus and he said, just go to the other side of town. I don't know. But, there's that still small voice inside of us sometimes that we need to listen to. And I went across the other side of town, and because of that, I wasn't. But I was that vulnerable population, and it could have been me. And to me, that's why I care so much about this, because it's the people in society that are vulnerable, that nobody really looks out for sometimes. And that we need to make sure that we're being our brother's keeper, we're being our daughter's keeper, and being better parents, and now I'm probably getting off to answer some of the other questions, but making sure our kids don't watch porn and other kind of crazy things that are entries into human trafficking.
And I kind of, I don't know, Bruce, if you want to continue here. What are the different ways human trafficking starts? How does somebody, what are different situations could lay out for us?
Well, I'm passionate about this issue, but there's certainly people that know more about it than me, so Tamika or Taisha, if you guys want to take this on.
We've had within Homeland Security investigations in Houston, it was actually a domestic servant case. And this is one that was in the news. You had a woman who was brought here under the pretense that she was going to be a caretaker 4 children in a family. And after being here multiple months, you know, she found herself in an exploited situation. So here you have an individual who thought that they were traveling to this country for the purpose of gainful employment. And then when they got here, they found it to be something totally different. So that's just one way in which a person can find themselves entering into a trafficking situation, is under false pretenses. But then I think Tamika can tell you about other ways in which individuals are brought into trafficking, or David.
But I think that, you know, just thank you so much, Bruce, for sharing. Thank you so much
put
for sharing.
close up your mouth.
Awesome. Thank you so much for just sharing pieces of your story. I think that's really critical, and I'm honored to know that part of kind of your journey. I think that, you know, as Taisha shared, I think there's awesome opportunity for us to really understand the reality of how people are recruited. I think that one of the biggest misconceptions, and I know that's one of the questions we're going to talk about, the myths, is that this is happening, that people are taking you from your house and kidnapping you and those things. And actually, a high percentage of individuals are trafficked right out of their own home. By family members, by boyfriends, by members of the community that deceive them. And so I think that it's important to understand that with those particular vulnerabilities, that we're all susceptible if we have those vulnerabilities in place, and that it's people close to them that they love and respect and adore that are actually trafficking them. And I think we'll talk a little more about that. But I think that's a key piece, one of the bigger myths that's out there, is that it's strangers abducting these kids or young adults and things of that nature, and actually it's really people that are close to them.
Yeah, I will add a couple of things. So this is definitely oversimplifying it, but if we were to look at the U.S. domestic population for trafficking, there is a common thread, and it's a past history of sexual abuse. And so one of the things we've done in a hospital collaboration, where we have psychologists screening for victims of trafficking and then referring to city case managers, is ask them to conduct a study on ACEs, and that's basically the Adverse Childhood Experience Score, which asks about 8 or 9 questions, I think, to see if there was a connection with that and trafficking, and something we could then publish through the doctor's research and get out to the trafficking community abroad. So well, they see both domestic and international victims of trafficking where they conduct the screenings. And so it was really interesting. The international folks showed low or 0 scores on the ACEs, almost all of them across the board. And the domestic ones did show higher scores. So we were wanting to see, was there a link between an ACEs score and an international victim of trafficking? We weren't seeing that. And so it just supports Taisha's point that for the international folks, and this is definitely an oversimplification, but it's going to be economic driven. It's going to be the appeal of jobs and opportunities and things like that. Whereas domestic, we see it to be maybe just a little bit more complicated than that. So I'll just add that little piece to that.
Yeah, Candy. I mean, the thing I was thinking, just in our experiences, the stories vary all the time. And I think that's something that I keep looking for a standard theme, and I don't see one. There definitely is what we've talked about, which is there's poverty, there's abuse. That's always there. Not always. We have odd cases every now and again that get pulled out of wealthy backgrounds just through other vulnerabilities or other abuse. But those things are usually there. But the various stories and ages can get surprising. So I think it does vary.
And then if you have questions, actually sit tight. We're going to actually have microphones out towards the end, so more of you guys can